This is just an example of putting some compost around and supplementing the soil. You get a little fertilizer with the compost, but it adds a lot to the soil. We've got pamphlets in there, and you may have some people that do their own compost. We've got so many hardwoods here that when the leaves fall, making a compost bin out of them and doing that, and then you can buy stuff already composted. One source that I have heard a good bit of around in this area is mushroom compost over at Appalachian Timber. I don't know if anybody else around this area has it. That's where, but for example, when the Master Gardeners helped with the planting at the courthouse, they incorporated that mushroom compost with that red clay soil to make it more desirable for the plant. So any kind of organic matter, whether it's some you make yourself or buy it, and that's just where you don't have to have anything fancy. That's one of those things that you'll see that people will sell you those green egg, the green eggs, the cooking, but the composter that you turn and everything else. And I mean, I've seen them built. He just got a round section of wire and adding and pallets. So I've seen people build a square with 4 pallets or whatever, wooden pallets, and that way you can pull it. And it's a little bit of an art to it. You can put it out there and it'll naturally do it, but if you want to speed it up by putting, like he's got the leaves there, but you want grass clippings, you want something green, sometimes you add a little fertilizer to help it, and but then you can also sticks, different things like that, but adding a little moisture. You don't want it soggy, but adding a little moisture, and then turning it so that it'll go through a heat. If you've ever, even with grass clippings, if you've had them piled up, you come by, you see that going through a heat where it's breaking compost. So running the lawnmower over them, like she said, if you can keep, pushing it to one side to the same direction and doing it that way. And I've seen, you can rent some of the chippers or whatever and doing it that way. But yes, you are right. By getting those smaller particles, they will decompose faster. As a young county agent, I've been doing this a lot longer than I want to admit sometimes, but I can remember I got a question, what's hotter, horse manure or cow manure? I mean, it's one of those double-edged swords. But the thing about it is, manure can be fine, but you need to compost it first. You don't want to take it straight out of the barn and put it in the garden. It's got too many nutrients in it, and it goes through a heat, just a decomposing heat. So you want to put manure, you want to stockpile it, mix it with your compost pile or whatever, but let it go through a heat before you apply it to the garden. But this gives you some kind of idea, of how much to use. So in answer to the question that I got, looking at this, horse manure is a little bit hotter than cow manure. Why do you think that is? A cow's got 4 stomachs. So it's broken down a lot when it goes through, whereas a horse, it pretty much goes straight through. So, this is saying here, you can put a lot more cow manure than horse manure. Poultry, swine. A lot of people, since we've got the alpaca business, a lot of people swear by alpaca manure, that it's, and it's another one of those things that if somebody got adventurous and found a way to try to clean it up and bag it and let it do that, but kind of like the ladybugs, it's been kind of hard to get up, but that's another good source. Now, this is trying to address the question we talked about earlier. Does anybody know when I use the word legume, what I'm talking about?
Beans.
Okay, but what do they do? What makes them be a legume?
The nitrogen?
They produce their own nitrogen. So, a lot of times you will see clover, for example. Clover, soybeans, lespedeza, things like that are what we call legumes. They're making their own nitrogen, so they're adding to the soil. So, and this is either lespedeza or blue lupin or something like that he has planted, that what he's doing is he's turning it under and putting it in the ground. That puts in more nitrogen, that adds organic matter. It breaks up the soil from being that old red clay like you're talking about, you know. Now, I don't know if I'd necessarily suggest something getting that tall. That's kind of a big plant. But if you're looking at a cover crop, and a cover crop just basically means in the fall you're going to plant something, and it's going to keep your soil in place and everything else, and then the spring you till it in, and then it adds to the soil. So there are a lot of different things you can plant. Some people just plant rye, which is a good grass. It helps because it's a grass crop. It will help a little bit on diseases, and you can till it in. Or you can go with some type of legume, and it adds a little bit more to the soil. But here's kind of what we're talking about, the legume, you know. Clover, vetch, southern pea. Any of this will add to the soil, but the legume will add a little bit extra. And, you know, then that's kind of a question I sometimes get with people that's got pastures for cows. They got clover out there. They know the clover's supplementing it, but they've got weeds, and it's just one of those catch-22s. If you want to spray something to kill the weeds, unfortunately, a lot of times it'll hurt the clover. So he has to make a decision. Is that clover helping him enough that he will go ahead and kill, let the weeds go, or what have you. Kind of hit this a good bit, and this is one of the things that you want to look at. And sometimes it'll be a little tag on it, sometimes it's on there, but we talked about the percentages. This tells you where the nitrogen comes from. But then look down here, calcium, sulfur, magnesium, some other minor elements. If you, and another reason we were talking about making your plan and keeping your plan in place is like beans. We've talked about beans and legumes, so they don't need as much nitrogen, so you wouldn't put as much fertilizer around them as you would, say, your tomatoes or some other things like that. So by having that plan and knowing, because you can actually put too much fertilizer around your beans and hurt them because they're used to making their own nitrogen. I've not tried this. I don't know whether you want to get adventurous enough, but he's got some composted manure in the croaker sack, and he's letting it soak in some water and making him a starter solution. And a starter solution is nothing but when you plant the plant, you pour a little bit of that in it, and it's just a pop-up or a little boost for that plant to get started. So he's just taking, letting it soak there for a couple of days, getting this area down in here, and using that water has got nutrients in it that will really help it pop up. You hear sometimes farmers talking about pop-up fertilizer on corn, and it has, some of the planters will have in addition to the seed being dropped, it'll have a little container with some pop-up fertilizer that'll put it right there, and that's just it. It pops it up and gets it going until it can do that. So it's just a good source to get it started. Here's where we were talking about when you get your soil report back, if you do a home vegetable garden, it has got it categorized by the different feeders. And there's a recommendation for fertilizer, a little bit more for your heavy feeders. The recommendation you'll get is for medium. Then if you've got the light feeders, if you've got beans and peas and stuff like that. When you get your when you get your report back, you'll have two options. You can either do the whole garden and go ahead and fertilize the whole garden, broadcast spray it, or if you've got your rows laid out and you know it tells you how much per 100-foot of row. And that's just an example of spreading it broadcast over the whole. And then there's putting it down there. And you would be surprised. I've had farmers tell me that you can plant more in a crooked row than you can in a straight row. But if you're trying to run a tiller or if you're trying to hoe, having a good straight line is good. So you can see how he's got this string right here. He's got a post on either side and running it, and it, you can say, oh, I can run a straight line from here to there. And you may start out that way, but having that string is just a good, and then a lot of times, and I think there's a picture coming up. There's a, like you want your rows. Most of the time we recommend like 36 inches apart. But that varies with the space you've got and the equipment. If you're going to work, if you've got one of those little small Manus tillers, you might can put them a little closer. I wouldn't go much over, get too much close over 24 because you got to walk through there. But if you've got a big tiller and you want to use it, you might have to open it up a little bit further. So your equipment a lot of times will dictate, and then the space, how much space you've got, because the further apart you're going to take up more. And this is just an example of where they got the fertilizer. I was talking about laying by, instead of putting, and you saw in that example a while ago where he put it, see here's your plants here, you put it over beside it. Here, you can see the residue right on it. He burned the plants by putting it too close. And then this is just another example of, he's got his stick marked and doing your spaces over a certain length. Or, a certain width apart. A question I get a good bit, and this is showing 2 or 3 things, how they've gone in and got squares for each one and really intensive gardening when you don't have much. And the biggest thing to keep in mind is to allow room for each plant.